I've been so blessed in my career that I want to help other people, whether it's municipal government or trying to figure out college students, trying to figure out where to go, or maybe it's a manager that's burned out or just needs some guidance. I believe that we should use our gifts to help other people.
Welcome to The Clear Voice, brought to you by Clear Career Professionals. I'm your host, James Groom. This week, we're diving into a part of leadership most people would rather avoid: the decisions that shape careers, impact lives, and sometimes carry personal costs. We are going to explore the dirty side of leadership with our guest, Ron Ward. Ron Ward is an Amazon best-selling author of The Dirty Side of Leadership and co-host of a podcast of the same name with Kristen Sokoloff. He's a founder and CEO of Forward Operations and a sought-after executive coach and leadership trainer. Before launching his company, Ron served as director of the Federal Probation and Pretrial Services National Academy at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, where he helped shape leadership training across the federal system. Today, he blends neuroscience, psychology, decades of executive experience, and a healthy dose of humor to help leaders communicate clearly, build resilient teams, and lead effectively under pressure. Ron, welcome to The Clear Voice.
Thank you, James. It's a privilege to be here.
Well, Ron, you've got Federal Law Enforcement Service, neuroscience, executive coach, author, and podcaster. When I look at your background, it's hard not to imagine anybody not calling you a modern Renaissance man.
I've been called a lot of things, so I guess that'll work as well.
Yeah, I've been called a lot of things too, and that would have been on the nicer side of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Ron, can you tell our audience, born and raised in Appalachia, and how do you get from there to what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was born in a little place, Buchanan County, Virginia, and it's on the West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky line. I could be in any of those three states quickly, so it's not the Richmond part of Virginia. But I grew up, my dad had coal trucks. The primary industry was coal mining. It was a unique time when I got in high school. The coal industry was suffering. Honestly, James, from an early age, I can remember seeing my uncles and relatives. They would come to family dinners, and they always looked like they were wearing mascara, and they would have, dirt under their fingernails, that kind of thing. And I respected them, and I still do greatly to this day, but I knew at an early age that I was going to try to do something different with my life. Some of it was selfish. I wanted to be a millionaire or a movie star or a rock star, but later I began to evolve. But yeah, I had a plan to leave, but again, totally respect that lifestyle and those people.
Well, your first step into law enforcement wasn't in the federal government. You served as a deputy sheriff before?
Yeah, not at all. I majored in education. I was going to be a school teacher. My goals were lofty. I was going to be a basketball coach and a school teacher. Through that process, I played 1 year of college basketball, and then I left and I signed up for a karate class. And I ended up taking to that like a fish in water, led to me qualifying for the U.S. karate team. I poured everything into that. So by the time I graduated college, I'd been asked to teach some classes for police officers, and my interest started moving from school teacher over to law enforcement. And I ended up applying for a job there in my county, and I became a deputy sheriff.
What did working as a deputy sheriff teach you about people?
It was really interesting. My first arrest ended up being combat. I had not even gone to the academy. There was two guys that had been drinking all night. They were on a rotten bridge behind the store, and I got the call, and I ended up stepping out thinking they're just going to run, and one of them started coming toward me. The bridge was rotten, so it was quite a challenge, but he was still a little intoxicated, and I was pretty skilled in the martial arts, so he threw a swing at me, and I threw him over my shoulder. And we scuffled a little bit, but I got the cuffs on him. And then I had to get backup to come, and we had to take him the opposite way because the bridge was so unstable. But at the end of that, I remember going home and sitting on the edge of my bed thinking, what in the world have I gotten myself into? Later, I began to deal with domestic disputes and all of these types of things, and it really thrust me into adulthood. I think I was very naive coming out of college. But when you begin to see real-world problems, and also when you see someone running across a rotten bridge and the look in their eyes, I want to kill you, that has a way of maturing you, James. That brings you into reality for sure.
So after serving your sheriff's office for a little while, you pivoted into federal service?
Actually, state probation in Virginia. I began to watch these probation officers in court, and frankly, I knew very little about it, but I got more and more interested. They would come in suits and report to the judge. So I got interested in that. I was fortunate enough to become a Virginia state probation and parole officer. I served in that capacity for a couple of years. Then I found out there's these cool guys, federal probation officers, and I was smitten when I began to research what they do. They work under the chief federal judge, and there's 94 judicial districts throughout the country. James, I've always been blessed in my life, but there were rarely any openings. And the first phone call that I made was in southern West Virginia, and there was an opening. And I ended up getting that and didn't even have to move, which is extremely rare in federal service, especially when you live in a more rural area.
Isn't it interesting when things just kind of fall in place like that?
Yeah, it really is. I've told everyone, if I dropped off now, I've lived a very blessed and productive life. I'm very grateful for that. I sure am.
So federal probation it's a law enforcement position, but it's kind of specialized. What would you say, the average person, like what is the duties of a federal law enforcement officer?
I'm really glad you asked that question. I did put that information in the book, but we are lesser known, but very large, and I think very significant to the federal process. A United States probation and pretrial officer, I'm going to make this quick, but when someone's arrested, they're brought into the martial lockup and they're fingerprinted. Well, then pretrial services immediately interviews that person and we make a bail recommendation. And if someone's released, in most instances, we supervise that person to make sure they're going to show up for court, they're doing what they're supposed to do. But the more challenging part that I did for several years was write the pre-sentence investigation. You go back from birth, you put all this information together, but you apply the federal sentencing guidelines, and that's what judges use as a guide to pronounce the right sentence. And those were very complex because there's all kinds of variables. You're dealing with attorneys, case law, and like if there were multiple drugs, when I used to do it, meth was one of our biggest cases, of course, in southern West Virginia. You would have to break down all the chemicals. So all those times I said I didn't need math came back to haunt me. I started using mathematics. And then the third component is supervision. And that's what most people know. People get out of federal prison and they're under supervision called supervised release. There's no parole in the federal system. Most people don't know that, but it was abolished during the Reagan administration. But it's called supervised release, and you make sure that people are meeting the conditions of supervision. But the beauty of federal probation is they're highly skilled in cognitive-based therapy and techniques. Our goal is to help people become productive citizens, not send them back to prison. So we consider it collaborative when we're working with someone, and we've had a lot of success. I was very proud to have been a U.S. probation and pretrial services officer.
You talk about math. Every time I hear a federal sentence handed down, I always have to do math because they always put it out in months, and it's very confusing to me.
Yeah, they do. Some of it's pretty complex, and you're dealing with high level. You're dealing with federal judges, U.S. attorneys, and I will tell you this, from state to federal, my writing had to improve drastically. I found out I'm in a different league as far as putting my words on paper.
During your career, you ended up being the director at FLETC for U.S. probation.
Yeah, I was very fortunate, but my martial arts came in again because my name had gotten out from doing national demonstrations. So I became one of the instructors at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. During that time, I worked my way up. I became a section chief, and then I became the academy director, or what was actually the director of training, because we trained all newly hired federal probation officers. We trained firearms instructors, safety instructors, and search team, and then we had some more academic programs that we ran at the academy. So it was a high pressure job, but an exciting job.
How many years did you do in federal service?
I did 26 and a half years total. Yeah, I'm 120 years old, James, so do the math.
I was going to say, you don't look old enough to have had that long of a career in the federal service plus those other years.
You heard it here, folks. James is my new best friend.
And at some point in time, Ron, you took your retirement and you pivoted into, was it the book first? Was it training? Was it coaching?
It was definitely the book. The preface of the book is the night before I terminated a federal agent. And I remember here's a guy who's competed nationally in martial arts, and I was more nervous the night before terminating this federal agent than I was in competing. So I had taken tons of training classes. So I knew there's a hole in my game, and obviously there's a hole in training. We would want to expose people to adrenaline, because if anyone understands fight or flight, you get nervous, you shake, and it's not cool like you watch on TV when you have to pull a weapon or things like that. So I began to watch the quick improvement of people from day one at the academy until they graduated. They would really master a firearm and defensive tactics and other things. So I decided to start applying that in leadership training. And we began to do stress inoculation, where you would do scenarios and you would be nervous because let's say that you had to terminate me in this scenario, James, and we give the whole framework, but it started taking off. James, I'm not talented like some people. I had guys who were going to start building houses and woodwork and all this other stuff. I don't have those talents. So I knew if I wanted to do something post-retirement that I'd become pretty influential and I had leadership skills. So I started writing that book about a year before I retired. As a matter of fact, I retired on a Friday. It was in COVID, so they had to do a virtual retirement, and I released my book on Monday. So that was the timing.
Well, the book's titled The Dirty Side of Leadership. What does that even mean?
I will tell you one of the worst feelings, and any leader listening, they've probably had this happen, but you always have this naivete. You think you're going to come in and lead the team with fresh ideas, and you're all going to be rah, and you're going to revolutionize the federal government. And then you make a decision that's not popular, and you realize two people down the hallway just can't stand you now. They already think you've blown it as a leader. And I remember walking in my car the first time that happened thinking, well, I guess everyone's not going to love me. I've read tons of good books, I still do, but I felt like there was some aspects that are not mentioned very often. So I did start the book with the night before having to terminate a federal agent. And as you know, James, I go through growing up in that rural area. I wanted stories because a lot of people would tell me I read 20 pages of that leadership book and I got the concept. So mine has 100 dirty lessons throughout my life. So I wanted to do something different. And I do think that the book was successful partly because of that title and the structure of it.
Yeah, I can tell you, I picked it up when you introduced yourself to me not too long ago, and it's a very compelling read, and it's very good. It's very useful information, but it's not difficult to read. I think it's compelling because of the story work. You start off, I'll spoil it a little bit, but just the very beginning, you start off describing your senses, your dry mouth, your being on edge, and not knowing exactly what you needed to do and having security on standby for this termination. Thinking back of that day, I mean, do you still feel just like that? Is that still very imminent in your mind?
It's imminent in my mind, but I will tell you that I do believe in scenario-based training, and what you do repeatedly, you get more comfortable with. I had to terminate people after that, and I had several very difficult meetings, but I did improve because of the steps, and we're going to get into it, but I do executive coaching, and there's ways that you can increase your courage. It's known. I use the example, you take a paratrooper in the military, they're jumping out of the plane the first time, they're probably a nervous wreck, but about jump 11, it's another day at the office. So I help people start small and work their way up. But you're right in general, and that was the premise of the book. I wanted to help other people deal with those difficult issues with courage and, of course, grace and empathy when it's needed.
I would agree with you that scenario-based training is very helpful. It's not my favorite training to do. It's probably the best for me, but it does require, you participating and not just sitting there. Do you think that when you look at cities and whether it be police work or fire, there's a lot of scenario-based training, but when you, at least from what I've seen, when you're talking about like executive leadership classes and things like that, I don't see a whole lot of scenario-based training.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why. I've been fortunate to be the keynote speaker and all that, and I love that. And I do believe you can have, some influence. But when I do the all-day training, which I help people everything from overcoming fear to understanding your personality, understanding brain functionality, word choice, body language. And then in the afternoon, by the time we go into the scenarios, people are starting to apply the principles they've learned that morning, and they get better and better as they rotate. They rotate to different scenarios. Of all the feedback, and I'm very grateful for it, but I get the most feedback when I do the all-day training. That I've had people say, hey, I had a personnel action that next week, and that training really helped me. They say things like, it's the first time I've gone to a training that I actually had takeaways I could use on Monday morning. And that was my goal in establishing a training company. Before every break, when I do training, I have each table give me some takeaways from the morning, and they can't repeat the previous takeaways. So by the time you get over in the corner, they definitely have to think about what they've learned that morning. But it gives me a lot of pride when they give takeaways and how they're going to apply it.
What are some of the scenarios that you would cover, like in an all-day class? I mean, obviously, probably terminating an employee.
Actually, we do not go up to termination simply because there's so many variables with different companies. But what we do is we might start off, just to give you a quick example. Let's say that you're my manager, James, and I came in late twice last week. Now, when I'm training federal agents, I have late on one court appearance. You bring me in, I teach the words noticed and wondering. This is a way, now, again, this is low level. You're not planning on terminating me. As a matter of fact, I might even need your assistance because my background is that I am a good employee. You've got a good employee and you're the manager, and I've been late twice. So I have people use the word notice and wondering. You could say, hey, Ron, I noticed you've been late twice, and I'm wondering what we can do to make sure that doesn't happen again. There's so much in that statement. You are saying, I noticed and wondering, you're not going. I was peeking out the window and I saw you pull in. By you saying, I was wondering, I've been thinking about it, what we can do, you're showing that you're on my team, but you're also making it clear that we don't want that to happen again. So I think that one sentence really, I've had a lot of feedback of people that use that in different capacities. So in that particular scenario, I want the manager to actually help come up with an action plan and support that individual, because what they learn is this individual and their wife just had twins. So they're having a little bit of a rough time, a rough go of it. And good leaders understand seasons. They understand situations. There's a lesson in my book. My book has 100 dirty lessons. One of the lessons says, you may be right, but are you right? And I did that so people would ponder what that means. And we've all been there. You may need to say something, but it just might not be the right time. So that's how it starts. It starts low level, and then it gets more serious of someone that doesn't want to work with another individual. And these two people are in conflict. And every manager always tell me, oh my God, I think these two work for me. And by the way, the scenarios I use all happened. They're all real scenarios. So it does kind of progressively get a little more difficult. But at the end of the day, when we debrief, people feel really good about their performance. Now, at the end of the scenario, you basically have a facilitator, or we do it as a group. What'd you do well? People are always hard on themselves, but you get them to say, what'd you do well? What would you do differently? And then I gauge their anxiety level. James, I've had people fall apart in these scenarios, so we let them repeat so they don't have a training scar. And then you have the person, like if you and I are partners and you're my supervisor, then I'm going to give you feedback. Well, this is what I think James did well, but I think when he said this, it did make me feel like I wasn't part of the team or something. So that's how those work throughout the day, and I'm really proud of that training.
I can tell you that one of my favorite lessons out of the book was, it's just on number 2. If you're not serving, you're not leading. Make service a part of everything you do. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and James, I'm going home to Virginia to visit my parents this weekend. My dad was a guy who, he had coal trucks. He was a volunteer fire chief, and there was a flood in 77. I wrote about it. And my dad took me with him, but he went from house to house, and I mean until midnight, spraying people's carpets, cleaning out houses, carrying furniture. And it's the first time in my life I had been so tired I couldn't walk up steps to my bedroom. And my mother never skipped a baby shower or anything. She baked, she sewed, she did whatever. So I grew up in a household, and I'm so grateful for that. But my family, they serve people. So I was taught that, and I do believe in servant leadership. I do believe that your ego can ruin you, or your failure, I call it connection points, your failure to connect, build rapport with your employees. It's a mistake. It's a mistake that'll come back to haunt you. And I'm not talking about you hang out on the weekends. I'm talking about rapport building and serving.
Relationship building, I think, is very important, whether that's leader-follower or coworkers or with your boss. For a lot of our listeners, obviously the communities that they're in, I don't know of anything that's more important than that, is having those relationships and really understanding each other.
And James, in body language training, there's tons of studies on this, but the first thing your brain does, it's going to look at me to see if warmth and competence. But warmth is always first. If you and I are approaching, we don't know each other, we're going to shake hands. Am I going to smile? Am I going to appear warm? Am I trying to look intimidating, closed off? And your brain is going to be talking to you. So if I greet you, James, and I give you a big handshake, and then we start talking about podcasts, and I've got a little bit of knowledge, I want to know your knowledge, I want to give you some dopamine, your brain will literally say, I felt good about that conversation. I like that guy. So your brain is always going. When I go into a conversation, James, and I train other people, I ask myself this question: what does this person want from me? And if people do that, you won't have these one-sided conversations. I know we've all done it, but you get nervous and you start talking about yourself. You're afraid that, you don't even remember to ask questions. One of the greatest things we can do is learn to be conversational. I call it threading. I want to thread and get some information about you. I want to get to know you instead of it being, as the old Toby Keith song, I want to talk about me, right?
How do you crack the difficult people that don't want to tell you anything about them?
Oh, I've got a great story for you. I know we're jumping into coaching, but I got to tell you this. I was coaching the CEO, and the first probably session and a half, he talked way more than I did. I'm supposed to be his coach, but he's wanting to impress me. So he begins to tell me about all this great advice he gives to these younger guys. So I waited, and we go into our third session, and I said, hey, you told me all these stories, these valuable lessons you taught these young guys at the gym, on the golf course. I said, hey, that guy that you talked to in the sauna, where's he from? I don't know. Was he married? Do you have kids? Couldn't answer a single question. And I said, sir, that's your problem. You are talented. You are bright. You do have life experiences, but you are not conversational. You don't know anything about these people, and you're not giving them dopamine, and chances are they may not want to talk to you a second time. They're not rejecting your wisdom. They're rejecting you. I had for a homework assignment for him to meet some strangers and ask questions and find out about these people. This is the funny part, James. We log on just like you and I are. I kid you not. And he's staring at me like this. I always greet people with a smile, right? And he's staring and he goes, you've screwed me up. What was happening is he's learning new behaviors. He's getting new tools. So he said, my brain, I'm going, should I talk? Should I listen? Should I ask questions? So I said, hey, just take a breath. All of that's going to pass. Usually that transition period lasts about 2 weeks, and then things get normal. And to this day, he has written me the best testimonial. He tells all of his buddies, you got to get in this coaching program. So once it took hold, but yes, I did have to be pretty direct to get him thinking about making himself conversational and learning stuff about other people.
And when you have somebody coming to you for coaching, I guess you would think that they're open-minded. They don't come because they feel like they're doing everything right. They know that there's something that they need help with, but it's amazing that it sounds like he wasn't aware of what one of his issues was. You had to kind of show it to him.
Yeah, that's true. And that was a person who was having problems with his employees. He finally agreed. We're in conversation. He agreed because I told him, hey, I think I can help you with these employees. It was younger guys. And of course, he felt like they didn't know anything and he knew everything. But I knew in the coaching space that we're going to be getting into his childhood programming and his environmental influences and his philosophy. So that's how that came about. But the coaching is interesting because you're right, James. When people contact me, like I've got at 4:15 today, I've got a discovery call. Someone reached out. We certify coaches. And if someone's got good leadership and we trust them, we can certify them as a coach. Or we can just coach them. The people that reach out are almost never the problem, but we get contracts with companies. So in other words, imagine the difference is you have to be here. So I coached like 21 people in 6 weeks, and it was really a mixed bag. I would have some people come on excited, notebooks, and someone else, you could tell they were being made to be there. Now, what I would try to do is win them over, with my charm and try to get them on board. And most of the time you can, but you can't disrespect them. You got to show, look, I respect your leadership. I respect your position. I usually ask them for their opinion when I'm covering like brain functionality or brain chemicals. And I've usually been able to build rapport, but it is really different when you're coaching individuals that hire you versus a company hires you to coach their managers. Big difference.
You've coached, I don't know, hundreds of people, I guess, at this point in time, maybe more than that. Do you see common themes, like 2 or 3 things that are always present or a lot of times present?
I do, and there's one anomaly that I will mention, but good, solid communication is usually something. There's something called shadow training, and not to get too deep, but think of it this way. There are people that go through life, their internal feelings do not match their external actions. So let's say that you said something hurt my feelings, and I just carry that. I come in every day, good morning, and I'm carrying that because I don't have the courage to express myself. So we deal with that sometimes, but a lot of people in communication, they don't realize that their own body language is sending negative signals. A lot of times they're creating barriers that they are not aware of. So we work on that. People who have insecurities, we work on the 4 gazes. We help them work on the power gaze, the social gaze, intimate gaze, and thinking gaze. So if someone is insecure, they have trouble looking people in the eye, then they go into a job interview and, they're hunched up. They don't have any distance between their earlobes and their shoulder. They're nervous. So we work with people to build their confidence. That's something. And then the third thing, it's really interesting to me, and I'm coaching some people right now. People are really hard on themselves, and I've been guilty of that. But you've got to give yourself grace. You're humans. When I learned to give myself a little more grace, it helped me a lot. James, it's rare that I have to coach someone that's overbearing or rude or difficult. That does happen, but most of the people I coach, they are nervous to speak in public. Sometimes they've allowed people to run over them, which goes right back to their childhood. They feel like they're not articulate. They're not as good as their coworkers, things like that. So there's a lot of self-esteem building in the leadership coaching space.
How often would you say self-awareness is an issue, and how do we reach people that aren't even thinking that they might be part of the problem?
Yeah, and that's the more challenging one. Again, it's not as frequent, but I've certainly coached people that way. What I try to do is get them to step into the mind of their colleagues. For example, there was someone that says, people don't listen to me in a meeting. I don't even want to be put on a team anymore because they don't like me. Well, they've got that victim mentality. And we also give an assessment called the saboteur assessment, and it's very telling about things that sabotage in your career. But I had that person, I say, look, let's you and I be detectives here. Let's figure out, why do you think Michael doesn't like you? And as we begin to thread that, they begin to realize that maybe they're being overbearing or maybe they're being condescending to people. One of the best ways, they used to call it reverse psychology, but you help them get into the mind of other people. And then I take people through the perception gap training. Every person has a perception. We all have these perspectives, but we develop a perception. And James, even with you and I, we've met prior to this online, and you walked away with a perception of me. I walked away with a perception of you. And what we all have to recognize is that can be up to a 20% gap of how you see me versus how I see me, and vice versa. So I help people narrow the perception gap, and that usually starts with just asking the right questions. Let's say we just had a staff meeting, and I say to you, James, how do you think the staff meeting went? Now, if you know that you have psychological safety and I'm open to feedback, you might tell me the truth. In my book, I've got the 8 magic words. Are you getting what you need from me? Leaders have blind spots, and sometimes you've got to be open to some constructive feedback. You've got to not argue your point, look at outcomes. So that's one of the best ways. Now, of course, there is rapport and there's trust. You got to build people's trust. You got to be consistent. You got to follow up. You ever had someone, James, you text them and you have no idea if they're going to get back with you a week? Those kind of things diminish trust, and they create that perception gap. So if we want to be effective, I always say, if you want a surgeon to operate, do you want them across the room or beside the bed? The more you know about your employees, the more rapport you build, the more they trust you, the more impactful you are.
And I think that's really important for when we're talking about municipal government, especially when you've got police and fire and even your front office personnel that do like water billing get bad customers from the worst traumatic event that you can imagine to, just daily complaints and yelling and things like that. If you aren't at least aware of what normal looks like for your employees, how will you ever know when they're having a problem or struggling?
No, that's exactly right. And James, as a side, man, my hat goes off to all the people that serve in municipal government. And I think the general public always, they want to blame the individual instead of the system. I was laughing one day because the DMV gets such a bad rap. I was talking to a friend and said, pray for me, I'm going to the DMV. I see those dedicated people that keeps the world turning. And I think they're minimized. I don't think they're given the credit. We always hear about military, sometimes law enforcement, first responders, firemen. And these people on the front lines in those municipal positions, my hat is off to them. They're American heroes, in my opinion, and I mean that. My daughter worked in a public-facing job for a while, and she would come home like, Dad, these people are impossible. And I get that. So, yeah, and I love what you guys are doing, supporting that.
And you guys, how long have you had the podcast going? I think you guys hit 150 episodes. I can't remember your tagline, but it has something to do with blending leadership and entertainment or something. I don't want to mess it up too much, but why did you decide that was the focus?
Yeah, it's named after my book, and our tagline is where leadership meets entertainment. James, and this is in no way meaning to demean any leadership podcast, but I know people have different personalities. So I've been an avid podcast listener for years. I mean, I turn a podcast on when I get in the shower. And I started to notice there's, they're kind of the same, and there's never any fun or laughter. And I thought, I tell this story all the time about a deputy assistant director. She was female. There were 3 male deputy assistant directors. She thought she was the best because she had value adds when she made comments and stuff. But it turns out, and those 3 guys would come into staff meetings, they would goof off, crack some jokes. So they did a 360 review, and it turns out she was rated least or last among the deputy assistant directors, and they had some words they could choose. They choose the word aloof. They said she was aloof. She was furious. So she wants to call her staff and give them a tongue lashing, as they say. But she kept her cool. She went home, thought about it over the weekend. She sought some advice, and someone said, maybe you need to ask questions, find out why did they rate you. So she got herself composed. She started bringing in employees. Well, guess what? It turns out they said, yeah, the 3 guys, they joke around a little bit, and it makes us feel safe. So in other words, there's some people that gotten terminated and things. So they feel like if the managers can laugh and joke a little bit, they felt safe. They felt a sense of belonging. So she realized, oh my gosh, I've judged those guys completely wrong, because they weren't doing anything inappropriate. They would just come in and kind of aggravate each other and have a little bit of fun. And it turns out, and I've got a whole training program called Bring Humor Back. People want to have some little bit of fun at work, and it builds trust. So going back, I made a long answer. That really stuck with me. So when I started the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, I reached out to Kristen Sokoloff. She has like 275,000 or 300,000 followers. We had kind of connected on her show, and we had good rapport. So I asked her to join me, but I said, let's make it fun. And so we do serious leadership things, but we try to have a little bit of fun with each other, and we joke around some, and it's really, it continues to grow, and we're very blessed for that.
Yeah, your rapport with Kristen is very apparent, and you guys have great chemistry on the show. It is very entertaining, so definitely check it out. I've watched several of the episodes, and I think my favorite one that I've watched so far was Extreme Optimism. I really appreciate the message in that one.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I have some coaches that I've certified, and they had their clients listen to that. honestly, James, we're living in a time, I tell everyone, you got victims and victors, and you got to decide which Vic you're going to be. You can be angry and do all the stuff, or you step in and do what you feel called to do. I'm a person of faith, and I believe we all should leave an impact. My final lesson in the book is leave it better than you found it, episode 100. And I believe that. And I've been so blessed in my career that I want to help other people, whether it's municipal government or trying to figure out college students, trying to figure out where to go, or maybe it's a manager that's burned out or just needs some guidance. I believe that we should use our gifts to help other people.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I think that optimism and sometimes remembering that it is about service, and even when you've got that hard day with one or two people that you're dealing with, most of these people are dealing with thousands of people that are getting good service, and they may not express it. You may only hear when it's negative, but it is a reminder that you're doing great work for a lot of people, even if they don't express it.
Yeah, and I tell people sometimes, imagine if wherever how you're serving, if it shut down, what would be the impact? What would be the ripple effect? And then people start to realize, well, I guess I am valuable. I guess our little neck of the woods here is important. But also, just living life. I would try, when people would get upset a lot of times, I try to just laugh in my mind. I'm just like, this is 5 minutes of my life. This person's been out of shape. I'll try to help them if I can't. That's okay too. You can't let things go so deep. You can't take it so personally. I teach a lot on neuroscience, and our amygdala is the seat of our emotions. And then the hippocampus is our memories, and they're right side by side. If people look at a diagram, the neurotransmitters barely have to travel. And so many people, they allow memories. Now, if it's trauma, I get it. That's a different level. But I'm talking about bad memories to affect them so much emotionally, their mood. I remember working for this guy, and people would tell me, no, don't ask him today. You would literally have to find out what kind of mood's he in. And you knew if you had a need, you better wait until tomorrow and hope his mood improves. You don't want to ask him today. And I think that's sad. I don't think people should be in leadership if you can't control your emotions. But we do some strategies to help you with your amygdala, to help you understand that I can release dopamine in this situation, or I can release cortisol. And cortisol is going to cause me blood pressure one of these days. So I try to laugh things off many times. James, I'm gonna tell you this real clear because it helps so many people. I put it on a social media post. I'm gonna just outline what happened. My heating and air conditioning system broke the night before. I've got Dr. Marissa Fiera, that is my partner in the coaching space. She's coming on as a guest. We'd never had her on as a guest on the podcast. We're about to sign on. My monitor breaks. The guy shows up to work on the heating and air. So I have no monitor. We're trying to work around it. Eventually it gets to the point where I have to say, look, Marissa, I'm sorry, but we got to postpone here. The guy is also, it turns out it wasn't bad with the heating and air, so he's ready to get paid. And then I had two other situations I won't go into, just a mild family thing. So, and my phone's ringing off the hook. So I'm like, I got to take a break and just get a quick bite to eat. I go over and get in my car, and I start it, and I've got a flat tire. So I come back in. I have to try to get roadside assistance. Then they take it to the shop. They call me and said, you need all four tires. They're dry rotted, because I'd bought this older little convertible. So anyway, in all of that, the old Ron Ward would have been stressed on all this. You might have heard some language that your mama didn't teach you when you were a kid. But because I've studied the brain so much, I literally said, I'm going to laugh about this in a few days anyway. I'm going to laugh now. I'm going to release dopamine. I'm not releasing cortisol. Believe it or not, that strategy, I've had people reach out to me like, boy, I felt you. I had this happen the other day, but I said, nope, dopamine, not cortisol. So people are literally calling out the chemicals and adjusting their mindset. And things really are relative, because think about it, James, I had all that happen, but I still had food. I wasn't freezing to death. I still had family. I still had friends. So, and I was able to pay to get my system fixed. So there's a number of blessings in adversity, is what I tell people. They're there. You might have to dig a little deeper on some days, but they're there. So that's my philosophy.
I think for me, when I look back, some of the worst things that ever happened to me turned out to lead me down the right path and get me to where I should have been all along. And I was much better for them.
James, I mentioned the martial arts a lot, but I didn't tell you the origin, and it's in the book, but I got bullied pretty severely. Now, I didn't put all the bullying in the book because I didn't want it to be a bullying book, but there were some incidents. One of them in there is called Junk and Glass, and the varsity boys, I was in the 8th grade, they pulled my pants, underwear, and everything down and stuck me to the back of a school bus. And I was barely hitting puberty. Like, there were so many things that was embarrassing about that. And it really stuck with me. Now, I named the chapter Junk and Glass to add a little humor, but there was no humor when I was in the 8th grade, believe me. But that one I don't condone, but some of the other bullying I think made me tough. But that is why I think I went so hard into martial arts, because there was later in my life, I had a ton of responsibility. And this is one of those times I felt like God spoke to me. I'm in a police car. And I'm a martial arts instructor. I'm getting married. Like, I had a lot of pressure, and it was getting to me. I was about to break, and I still had to travel and do the martial arts thing as well as teaching. And I felt like I heard a voice that said, you don't have to fight anymore. James, that was so strong. 6 months later, I leave the martial arts and close my studio. That's how strong that was to me. And it still paid off, but it was the biggest relief ever to get out from under, because I was in a really intense system. Yeah, that was kind of the trajectory of that. And I try to help people, like, don't stress out over stuff. This too shall pass. You're going to get through it. It helps me so much to think that way, and I wish I had thought that way more often. You got to smell the roses. When I got to be the chair of the Federal Law Enforcement Training Accreditation Board, instead of really enjoying that, I put a lot of pressure on myself, because, you've got the FBI Academy Director, DEA, you got all the big guys in there. I remember they called me and said, hey, we're going to do the next meeting at the FBI Academy, and they built a new auditorium, and we're going to be in that auditorium. And my bosses were coming from D.C. over, and all of this is going on. And this is so sad, James, but instead of me going like, this is so cool, this is a great opportunity, I was pissed off. I'm like, why in the world, do I have to go? And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first big gathering in that auditorium. And instead of me enjoying that, I was like full of pressure. Now, when it was over, I was relieved and glad. But if you're listening to me and you're stressed, just live in the moment. If I could go back, I would have went, yes, let's go to the FBI Academy. Let's rock it. We allow pressure to steal the blessing in things, I think. And man, I want to have a different mindset. I want to enjoy the moment, enjoy people. I want to be intentional about relationships and deliberate. And I'm really trying to do that, James.
I've just got a couple questions before we wrap up for you. There's probably somebody listening today that has got a hard decision to make for tomorrow. They're trying to decide what they're going to do as a leader. What advice do you have for them?
Yeah, that's interesting. And not to oversell coaching, but I have a whole decision-making process that I developed. It's pretty extensive. It's hard to, capsulate it in 30 seconds. But what I would say to people, if you're making a decision, number one, you got to put it in categories. Is this like a level one, like what socks to wear tomorrow? Or is this, am I buying furniture or whatever? But if it is a very serious decision, then you got to look at variables. Who's impacted by this? I'm going to give you a quick example. I just met with a guy who was going to move to Cleveland, Ohio for a $10,000 raise and a paid move. Well, we began to break it down, and I said, what's your wife saying? He said, she don't really want to do it. And I'm like, what's your kids? They don't want to do it. So after we really looked at it, and we did pros and cons are still great. He and I did it right, sitting at a restaurant, pros and cons. And it turns out that it was going to be traumatic for the family. Also, tax-wise, it's $10,000. And everyone listening knows you don't leave Charleston to go to Cleveland, Ohio. Come on. Shout out to all your Ohio listeners. But when we broke it down, we let our ego get in the way, or we allow fear to control our decisions. And that's why I said we need to live a life where our internal feelings match our external actions, and we make good, sound decisions. I also believe strongly in a mentor or a good, wise friend. Sit down and talk to someone about the decision. A lot of times they'll give you an objective opinion and help you come to the conclusion that you need to be. But here's the other thing I say. When you make a decision, especially if it's kind of etched in stone, don't doubt yourself. You got to go. you got to move forward. A lot of people spend their life in regret. Now, if it's a small decision that you can change midfield, that's fine. But when you make a decision, make it and go on. There's nothing worse than hearing people groveling like, oh, I shouldn't have done this. I wish I'd have. Stay out of that world, that what if world. Just take it and go. Make the best you can.
Do you think that leadership ever gets easier?
There's a lot of variables to that because I think leaders right now, it's more difficult than ever because you're navigating all the technology. You came out of the pandemic, and I can say this firsthand. I've had so many leaders reach out to me because their employees got accustomed to working from home, and it's almost demanded now. They're having turnover. Retention is difficult because the company down the road is allowing 3 days of remote work, and you only allow 1 day or whatever. I think there's a lot to navigate. I don't think it gets easier, but I think we can be wiser. I think you've got to get the right mentors, the right coaching. You've got to embrace technology in ways that it can help you. If you're afraid of technology, it's going to put you behind. AI is coming. Within the next 5 years, God only knows what an impact it's going to have on the workforce. So I tell leaders, keep your optimism. Learn and grow, be adaptable, and embrace technology, and I think you'll be fine.
And finally, what do you think people will take away from your work?
That's a great question because as you get older, you do start thinking about legacy and impact. And I hope they know that I tried to help people not make the mistakes that I did. I hope they know I was a person of faith, that I invested in people. There's nothing I like better than when I get a call that someone took my interview course and they said, hey, I got the job. I did great on the interview. I love that. Yeah, I want to be known that I made a positive impact, and going back to my final dirty lesson, I want to leave it better than I found it.
How do people find you? I mean, you've got a lot of different things going on. Amazon's where the book is, and the podcast is everywhere podcast could be. Mm-hmm. But what else?
Yeah, well, my website, it's Forward, but I use a number 4 because there was like 10,000 companies named Forward. So it's with the number 4, WARD, operations, plural.com, forwardoperations.com with a number 4. Always love to get feedback. I do Ron's Rants on social media. That's when people have a beef. And I'm going to do a new batch of those next week when I get back from Virginia. But if people want to reach out to me, I'm always glad to hear it. I'm on all the social media channels, Instagram, Ron_Ward_, LinkedIn. I'm everywhere, James. I try to be.
You have to be these days.
You have to be.
Well, before we sign off, what advice would you like to leave everybody with?
Be optimistic. Maybe listen to that episode you talked about. Don't allow all of this chaos, this division. Don't be sheep. Don't let the psyop affect you. You be optimistic. You take care of yourself, your family, and be a good person. You're going to be fine.
Well, thank you, Ron. I love leaving it on a positive note. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us. I look forward to future episodes of your podcast. And the next time you're in the DFW area, let me know and we'll grab lunch.
I would love to do that, James. Yeah.
To the listeners, thank you for what you do day in and day out in your communities. Follow the Clear Voice on your favorite podcast platform. Check out Clear Career Professionals' LinkedIn page and our website to keep up with the latest executive leadership opportunities. And we will catch you next time.